So, what exactly can the Executive do? I'm joined now by Employment and Learning Minister Sir Reg Empey. You're very welcome. Isn't it clear now that this motion was defeated yesterday, but the programme for government and the investment strategy really are fairly worthless at this stage because things have changed so much in the intervening 12 months or so?
I wouldn't describe them as worthless because programmes are built up and are anticipating what's going to happen over a prolonged period of time. So I don't think they're worthless. But having said that, it's fairly obvious that on some of the targets, for instance, child poverty and things like that, we all have concerns. And I don't dispute that it is something that's going to have to be kept continuously under review under those circumstances.
I mean, how radical do you think the Executive should be prepared to be in the Republic? Of course, it's a different scenario and they have to balance their own books. It's not a block grant. But they're talking about radical things, massive cuts in pensions. At one stage, they were talking about 10% cut in public service pay. In the private sector here, many firms are now on sort of 3- and 4-day weeks. Is that not something the Executive should be thinking about, releasing money from the public sector to ensure that some of their targets are met outside of that?
Well, first of all, it doesn't automatically follow under devolution that if we spend less, we can then spend it on some of the things that you're referring to because our limited powers. And, of course, if we don't spend some money, it simply goes back to London. So we have to watch that. The other thing is, of course, that we've been trying to maintain a high level of capital spend on infrastructure. And reference was made in the debate to that. And we have been spending a lot more in the past year than ever before, and there's a very ambitious programme going forward. And as you know, it's the construction sector that really was taking the heat of this recession in the first number of months. So clearly we're very reluctant to do anything that would destabilise that capital expenditure because you can imagine the impact it would have. Other areas, of course, we do have to look at it from time to time. But because we have a mix of direct expenditure from London and direct and locally driven expenditure, we've got to be careful we don't throw the baby out with the bathwater.
But in terms of what the Executive has done to date, take water rates, for instance. It's managed to defer charging for water, but that is building up in the system that has to be paid for. And simply, you know, it's almost as if the Executive's in denial on that issue.
Well, we're not in denial, and let me be clear about that. But look, you know, you asked me a question, what are we doing? So what we're trying to do is to ease the pressure on people. So, OK, the water charges haven't been introduced for domestic users. Secondly, we have the fuel payment or credit, whatever way that's going to work out, coming through in the next few months, which is designed, again, to help some of the more vulnerable in our society. We have also tried to push forward as many infrastructure projects as possible. I'm involved myself in a range of initiatives on apprenticeships, on training issues that we're hoping even to make further announcements in the next month or two on that as well. So it's a cocktail of things that we have to do to make sure that at least we can address some of the issues. And of course, when you see what's been happening in the Republic, as you said yourself, I mean, a year ago they were high on the hog, the Celtic tiger. I mean, it has been absolutely astonishing the way both their economy and indeed our national economy has gone. And the world is facing a year with no growth, and I don't think in any of our lifetimes there's been an example of that before.
I mean, there was a period earlier on during the course of this depression when people were saying, thank your lucky stars, you're in the UK, it's a bigger economy, you could be in Iceland, you could be in the Irish Republic, you'd really be in trouble now. But in the last few months, the IMF saying the UK is going to suffer more than anybody. Actually, the jury's out now on the basis of which side of the border you should be living on, surely.
Well, I don't think I would share that view. Yes, there are issues, and I would not have done what the London government has done. I think they have wasted a lot of money, and I've made this point before on the VAT giveaway, which I don't think is of any real benefit to anybody. I think it should have been targeted specifically at users, for instance, who take the VAT off heating bills or something, which would have been something constructive to do with that, give tax credits for companies to pay for training. But to be a large economy like the United Kingdom is still a safer bet for us. Now, the Republic is clearly having huge problems, and the reason why they're having to force through these cuts, they are going to have to go to the market to sell their debt in the next few weeks. And if their credit rating as a nation is reduced and people don't buy their debt, the only way they have really nothing they can do. They can't raise their own interest rates because they're connected with the euro now. And how do they sell their debt? And if they can't sell their debt, then they're going to have radical cuts in expenditure or radical increases in taxation.
Now, we have seen also in the Republic radical measures like government ministers taking pay cuts, asking public sector workers to take pay cuts. Obviously, as you said, there's no point, particularly in Northern Ireland, going it alone because you won't be able to keep the money in the pot. But you have discussions now increasingly with the Conservatives, given the sort of courtship between your two parties. Is that something you could see that a future government in Westminster, maybe a Conservative government, bringing in, a sort of hair-shirt policy?
I think, quite frankly, everything's on the table here because none of us know what's the next twist in this story. I mean, we couldn't have sat at this table a year ago and had a conversation like this. Nobody really, apart from one or two people who are now saying they spotted this coming, very few people saw what was going to happen. My anxiety is that when, as I suspect the government will change, and people see the books, it depends what the situation is at that stage. And what happens if the United Kingdom can't sell its debt? The only way, and by that phrase, in other words, the government has promised these billions for the banks. They've guaranteed and insured loans. Now, if those guarantees are called in, the only way the United Kingdom government can get that money is to sell bonds in the market. And that means other investors have to buy those bonds, particularly maybe Chinese investors, investors from the Middle East. If they decide, well, we're not sure that this country's a good enough risk or there's not enough return on those bonds, what do? Put up interest rates. Now, the Republic doesn't have that facility. At least the United Kingdom does. And I think that the risks that the UK is running is that our debt is growing far faster than our ability to repay it. And I think that the government has been behind the curve throughout this crisis in anticipating the downturn. The estimates at the pre-budget reports for economic growth were that it would be a reduction of less than 1%. Come on. Honda's closed, Jaguar's closed, Nissan's closed. Anybody can see that that's nonsense.
OK, well, we'll have to leave it there, but thanks for joining us, Reg Empey. Thank you.